So, uh, welcome everybody. Our next panel is going to focus on Yukon's role in the energy transition, and I'll just let the moderator and the panelists will go from here. So, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Could somebody do me a favour and just close the doors as well? Thanks. My name is Rick Corbin. I'll just start by acknowledging that we're on the traditional territory of the Tarn-Quatarn Council and the Kwanlin-Dun First Nation. I'm really pleased to be here today to talk to you about Yukon's role in the energy transformation. We've got a great panel in front of you today to talk through this. First off, Minister Stryker, Minister for Energy, Mines and Resources, and somebody who I know has been at the forefront of energy policy in the Yukon over the years. Laurelie Johnson on the far side, who many of you will know is through the Yukon Chamber of Mines, but is also the Director of Indigenous Affairs and Canadian Community Relations at Hecla. Hector Campbell, Chair of the Nacho Naik Dun Development Corporation, but also the retired, I think you did write retired rather than previous, the retired Director of Resource Planning and Regulatory Affairs for Yukon Energy. And finally, Chelsea Hamilton, who's a mining engineer and financial assessor for SLR Consulting. John, I'm going to start with you. So we've got two real main topics to talk about today. The first is critical minerals and critical minerals development in the Yukon. And the second is what mines can do to decarbonize and how we make that happen. I could probably maybe paraphrase that in a slightly different way to say, what do we need to do to push forward the development of critical minerals in the Yukon whilst also decarbonizing mining? John, I'll start with you. So in terms of the Yukon government, what would you say is, what's the government's doing at the moment? How are we progressing in terms of that development of critical minerals?
Hi. Oh, hi. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Rick. So the first thing to start off with, and whenever I'm out there talking in the public, is that we need to make this energy transition. It is super important. Climate change is not something that we should let happen. And so we need to move off of fossil fuels. There was fossil fuels have been an amazing energy source over a century and a half, but the problem is that there are unintended consequences with those fossil fuels. So we've got to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And no matter at what path you look at in terms of how we make that transition, we need minerals. Critical minerals are critical to that transition. Copper, zinc, tungsten, you name it. There's a list of 30 plus minerals that the feds have said under their critical mineral strategy. And the Yukon has a whole lot of those minerals. Okay, so here we have a bunch. And Rick, you asked, what are we doing? So the main thing that we are doing is understanding that we need energy infrastructure, renewable energy infrastructure in place in order to unlock those critical minerals. Like, it's key. So if you think about our grid, and Hector and others are from Yukon Energy here, you would know that most of the energy that we have on the system right now is renewable. But it's not nearly enough to deal with the growth of the territory, the transition from, say, internal combustion engines to electric vehicles and home heating, and it's certainly not enough for the mines that would get at those critical minerals. So when we talk with British Columbia or Yukon First Nations or the federal government, our conversation is around how we will establish that renewable energy infrastructure to support the ability to get at those critical minerals. So it is both essential that we get it and on both sides of that equation. In order to make the transition, we need to have the critical minerals. In order to have the critical minerals, we need renewable energy. So if we use fossil fuels to get at the critical minerals, it's not a win ultimately. So that's the basic position that we're at right now. And everybody in here, well, everybody from the Yukon in here will know that we just lost Minto Mine this past spring. That was hard. They were our one copper mine in the territory. Not a large-scale copper mine, but it was all on Selkirk Category A land. So it was hard to see that happen. And that's an important piece for us, but we're off as a government talking to mining companies that have work being done toward critical minerals. We're talking to majors that are interested in producing those critical minerals. We're talking to smelters that are looking for that material. And we're talking with federal government about how they can help us support that through energy infrastructure.
Okay, thanks. Laurie, is government doing enough?
Oh,
If that's not a loaded question.
What can I say? So I want to pick up on a few things that John said, since we are, one's the regulator and one's the driver. The Chamber of Mines supports industry. Our job is to support industry and figure out how industry can be also more involved. I'm going to jump on the piece that didn't get raised in this, and I think there's an opportunity to look at how do we focus on the critical minerals piece, use it as a driver and maybe an opportunity to find ways to, we keep talking about how are we going to get these critical minerals fast. So we have to talk about permitting. It's certainly been heard loud and clear this week. We also have to talk a bit about investment. And so if we can keep those two pieces together, I think it's super clear that industry is involved and engaged. And I do believe, most of industry is working to do the right things. They're working close with nations. They're trying to build opportunities. And, we see that here this week. It's really great to see First Nation governments and development corporations and this collaboration that's starting to come. And we've done a lot of work for a long time. I think now we need to get to that point where we take all the work that's been done and take the next step and actually start focusing on some of these and getting them over the goal line. I do think we're one of the best jurisdictions in the world. I do think we hold people highly accountable, and it's time to move those. The how, not sure yet, but I do believe most industry is involved in doing this right. We just have to figure out what right is more quickly than we have been, or a world-class jurisdiction with world-class deposits is going to get missed in how this works in the industry. I mean, it's fickle, right? It will go elsewhere.
Okay. Just on that, you said, world-class deposits. I mean, Chelsea, if I just come to you, maybe, as with your expertise in terms of global mining, and let's bring the conversation around to energy, because I think, we take the view, I think everybody accepts that the benefit in developing critical minerals in the territory is definitely there. And so the question is then, how do we do that in an energy efficient way? And you might also ask the question, should we? Do we need to worry about doing it in an energy efficient way? And I think the answer to that is probably yes. But just in terms of how mining development occurs in other parts of the world, are we better here? Are we, is it easier to produce critical minerals in an area where renewables are perhaps more available than it is in the Yukon?
There's a lot of different ways to approach that, but I think in terms of the global scheme of things, what we have to offer here in the Yukon and in Canada, northern Canada, is high ESG standards for any of our mineral product. So that alone is something to stand by and kind of keep as something that we've got in our pocket. But also, if you think about what we've got in the Yukon and you look at the carbon footprint of the minerals we've got here, it does depend a little bit on the mineralogy. So the Casino mine, for example, the greenhouse gas emissions coming out of there, if that is to be permitted, will have a fairly high carbon footprint, but it's, you know, there's a bit of improvement versus, from diesel versus LNG, what they're going to for their power system. Sorry, gather my thoughts here again. But then if you look at the nickel show project, for example, it's a nickel sulfide. So the carbon footprint of that product is actually extremely low compared to global production because of the mineralogy. It's comparing to Indonesia, comparing to the ESG standards that are coming with the product out of Indonesia, we've got a major advantage. So I kind of, in my thinking, generally would say that it's more important to get these critical minerals to the market quickly in order to offset some of the higher footprint minerals coming out of the rest of the world.
Yeah, okay. So, John, anything you'd like to add on that in terms of energy use in the Yukon?
Yeah, well, but let's take casino, and I don't know if Sheena or Paul are here, but if you are, just let me know. Okay. Anyway, when I talk to the majors that are looking at casino as a possibility, and let's please, and I take Laura Lee's point about permitting and all the work that's going to come before XCOM and all that stuff that's there. But whenever I talk to those majors, they're now saying that they need to have a low carbon footprint in their mines, right? So that's a requirement for them, for their mines. So if you want to get to a casino, my sense of it is that we need to make sure that we're also supplying access to renewable electricity in order to make it happen. Now, and Chelsea's point was about ESG and the difference here. And, you know, honestly, I guess this is just my flavor of government, but I'm not interested in mining here unless it's ESG. That's it. That's like we are committed to rewriting legislation with First Nations, government to government, and we are committed to doing our part in the energy transition, and we need our mines. And we just heard Grand Chief Johnson minutes ago talking about the importance of our communities and making sure that they are whole through this process, right? We're just not interested in having mining in the Yukon if it's leaving a legacy that's a problem. But here's the great news. Mining knows how to do it right. Like I have seen this transition in the industry, like around safety, around talking with communities, around working with First Nations, around procurement, around the environment. Thank you. And so I'm impressed with the mining industry that I see and the potential that it has. So that's the mining that we want here. And frankly, that's the only mining that we're going for right now. And so just on the issue, then I'm in a different place. Like I've seen some of these arguments in the past where we say, hey, we should just go ahead and get this out fast and quick and say heavily using fossil fuels because that's the most expedient path. However, it's not the path that we want to choose over the long term. And those mining companies, the majors now, at least when I talk with them, they're telling me only way they're doing it is if they have green power.
Can I jump in a little bit? I think I would like to add that as far as where we are with this energy transition and where we are geographically in the Yukon, the amount of effort that it's going to take to build these power systems up here to get these minerals out is massive. Yeah. And it's probably the highest hanging fruit as far as the energy transition goes. There are other places in the world, in Australia, Chile, Sweden, where they've got renewable power year-round. They don't have seasonality issues. And they need that technology there as well. So as far as low-hanging fruit goes, and that's really, I think, where we need to be focusing for the transition, I would almost argue that these critical minerals are so badly needed for other higher impact systems in the world than maybe it is up here. I personally, I would love, of course, everyone would love the industry to be completely decarbonized right now, but it's that's a tall order when we don't have energy storage solutions, which I'm sure Hector will talk about for climates such as we have here.
I was just going to come on to Hector, but I mean, I guess in some ways, it's a little bit like saying, it's better to build a solar panel using renewable energy than it is to build a solar panel using coal-fired power. But it's still better to build a solar panel. That's kind of what you're saying, if you need that solar panel really quickly. Hector, maybe I can come on to you. In terms of energy delivery, I'll keep talking while you're turning the microphone on. Energy delivery, there we go, in the Yukon. I mean, John, a couple of years ago when we spoke, one of the discussions was around a connector to BC, that being the sort of solution to all the problems. Don't get me wrong, I'm putting words in his mouth there. He didn't ever say it was the solution to all of our problems, just so we're clear. But that is a long way off, and it's probably still a long way off, even though that was a conversation we had 2 years ago. And for mining development, waiting 10 or perhaps even 15 years for that is too far down the line. So Hector, over to you. I mean, where you're doing some interesting work at the moment. I mean, you'd like to just comment on that.
Sure. I've just completed a feasibility study for the Northwest Territories with respect to renewable energy options for some of their mines, some under new ownership that are looking to start up or reopen. And a couple of things surprised me, and it's relevant for the Yukon. Mines today, right now, can go to renewable energy sources 30 to 50% of their entire energy requirements, okay? 30% penetration with solar and or wind, and you can bump that up to 50% with sufficient energy storage, okay? And that can happen right now, and we're seeing it in the Yukon. There's a lot of solar farms going up, so we know what costs are, we know what the operating costs are. There's a new wind farm about to be commissioned on Heckle Hill, NWT, just as a brand new 3.5 megawatt wind turbine that was commissioned a month ago in Inuvik. But to go further than that, there's 3 technologies that one or more will be play a key role, and it may be all 3, and I'll mention them. Small modular reactors. I'm looking forward to hearing what the expert, I think there's a talk tomorrow on SMRs. Geothermal. Dave Thompson is here. If you want an update on what Everett Technologies is doing with geothermal, it can play a very significant role, both for grid-connected mines and for off-grid mines. The third technology that's been around for a long time, but you don't hear as much about it, is hydrogen. And hydrogen, I'm convinced, has a very important role for mining, in particular for open pit mining, because you can deal with the transportation component of their GHG footprint with hydrogen, okay? And the good news about hydrogen, it's been around a while, and they keep finding more innovative ways to extract it more efficiently. But you can run it with very little modifications, for example, in a diesel engine or in a natural gas-fired engine. And one of the things I'm not hearing discussion about, but engine manufacturers are manufacturing dual fuel capable and even triple fuel compatible. So you can start off using diesel. When LNG is available, you switch to LNG, pretty simple changeover. And then when hydrogen's available, you burn hydrogen. So you're installing infrastructure today that's good through a transition right down to a net zero economy effectively.
And so, I'm going to come to you, Laurie. That can all be done, but is that something that mining companies can do, or is that really something that government needs to do? First, Laurie.
Well, I think, God, there's so many things I want to say. Like, I feel like I've been sitting here for 3 hours.
Got 21 minutes.
It's okay. Really, I'm just going to answer the last question first as you asked it. I think everybody knows one of the things that's going to be something mining companies need to work with, and this is something we've been talking to Yukon about, so this will be no surprise, is there's a delay in getting all of these things. So to Hector's point, it's wonderful that they're developing these, or they're newly developed somewhere, but companies don't just change whole fleets all at one time. And as soon as this becomes the thing that we determine is what we want, and this is where we have to be very careful in setting expectations that are reasonable. So can mining companies do it? I would argue yes. Can they do it overnight? Absolutely not. And the more mining companies that want to turn to this, and you'll see the majors go there first because they have the bandwidth to do that, they'll consume it all. And so then I just say you have to caution yourself in the approach and the expectations so that you allow mid-tier and junior companies to make this transition. They do not have the same capabilities. So yes, I think it's great if we go that direction. Yes, I think it's possible. Probably not as quickly as people want.
John, back to you.
Yeah. Okay, and I've known, well, probably of this panel, I've known Hector the longest and always respected him. And I've been around this question of the energy transition for a long time, decades, and it's still hard. But I also will say that, hey, it's now, 35 years since we very clearly, as scientists, said we need to make this transition. And then by 30 years ago, it was very clear to politicians that that's what we needed to do, and the public. So, and now we're pushing up against harder edges. So yes, it does take time, and I agree with that, but we can't dally much more, okay? It is a pressing problem, and we all know that the social license of mining has its challenges, and we need to see those wins. So, and we just had, well, there's Scott in the back right now. Scott's small scale, and he has solar. So there are some solutions which we can get to now, and they will not transition the whole thing. And this is one of the truths, and Chelsea was sort of talking about it. Like, when if you're using fossil fuels as your main source of energy, when you first bring on renewables like wind or solar, you can displace quickly, but you can't displace all the way because it's not baseload. Geothermal has the potential to be baseload, so that's a different one. Hydrogen is not an energy source, everyone, right? And Hector knows. So it's an energy storage because we can't go out there and harvest hydrogen. What we need to do is produce it. You could produce it from fossil fuels. Well, you're right back to the same problem. Or you could produce it from renewables. But storage for hydrogen is kind of tricky. It's a small molecule. So there are some solutions, but I agree with Laura Lee. It's not an easy transition. It's a hard transition. And my sense of it is that it will be disruptive. And we heard a talk this morning about disruption and about how fast we move when we move. If the majors go, they will create the market, and then the juniors will come, and I agree with that. But we need to start moving. We've got to map it out. So let's say that casino were to go. And again, it has to go through that whole permitting system, and I'm not trying to prejudge where that goes. We need the First Nations to say that yes, they agree with this. If if they do, then I think a major would come if they saw the pathway. If they saw us doing the groundwork for a grid connect, they would say, hey, that's on its way. And then they would be willing to go in with an LNG plant or whatever it is that they put through YESA to say this is the way we would energize it, knowing that the infrastructure is coming. And I think they would be smart to think up front and offset as much of that fossil fuel as they can with those intermittent renewables that we have. Or to go to a technology like Ever and say, hey, we're gonna do this. There's still these, we don't have examples of large scale geothermal, which is not based on some like Iceland's type of geothermal, but Berlin is starting to do this, or Germany is starting to do it with Ever's technology, and you think about how that might work in a place like the Yukon. And the challenge for us here is that our rate base for our energy system is 45,000 people. Well, we're talking about many hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. So in order to do that, we have to think larger. We have to think like Canada and say, hey, the Yukon is a place where there are all these critical minerals. Let's do this in a nation-building fashion. Let's connect here or invest here in renewables one way or another, because it will unlock all of this amazing potential. And still have to go through all of that relationship with community and make sure that from my perspective, the way to go, Rick, is that whatever energy technologies we go with, we bring on First Nations as equity stake partners in those renewable technologies so that they're getting a return on their investment. They can partner with us as a government, but they could certainly also partner with a mine that wants to build these renewables or invest in them. I think there's great potential there.
Okay, thanks, John. Yeah, and Laura, you wanted to comment on that.
I did. I think I hear the passion of no, don't be sorry. It's a wonderful thing. And in fact, I think if we can put the same amount of passion into working in partnerships and not so much saying, but this piece has to be like, we all need to work together to get to yes or no. Because it is inappropriate, sorry, but I gotta say it, to desperately want to have something but refuse to be part of the solution. Like, you can't want it tomorrow and not be part of the solution. And again, I know it's risky and it's scary to do these things in your community, but get involved, ask the questions, let's get those answered. Let's see if indeed these amazing assets we have here can contribute to the global economy and to the global need for this green energy that we all want. I mean, it's super easy to sit there and say, I have to have it, but then we have to make that next step to being part of the solution.
Okay, thank you. Hector, you were nodding away to John.
No.
And whether that was agreement or disagreement, we'll now find out.
No, I agree with Lorelei. It's going to take all of us working together. I mean, I also can speak a bit on behalf of Nachanak Development Corporation. And we're very active today with a couple of renewable energy projects. We're working with other Yukon First Nation Dev Corps to give us some economies of scale in investment caps to work on even larger projects. So I mean, the First Nations, the ones that I'm working with, want to be part of the solution. They want to be true partners, equity partners, and they want to be involved in the operation and put their citizens to work and develop apprenticeship programs. One of the things we found out quite recently, okay, if you were doing work for a mine and you're a supplier or service, you need 5-year term contracts so you can hire First Nations youth that want to go through the 4-year apprenticeship cycle. You can guarantee employment. And that's not even happening with a number of mines today. They're 1 or 2 year contracts. So it's kind of tough when you're a local contractor. You can't hire apprenticeships, first year ones, if, well, it's not the right thing to be hiring them, knowing you're going to lay them off. You may lay them off in a year. Okay, so.
Okay, so look, a lot of debate, discussion there. I'd like to open it up if anybody has any questions they'd like to ask any of the 4 panelists today. Please.
We've heard a lot of talk about possible solutions for renewable energy, and we skirted briefly around the idea of modular nuclear. I don't know who to ask this question of, and then maybe it's very naive of me, but I'd like to ask Hector. Do you see this from your position as in Corp Dev with the Nyacho Nyak Dun? Do you see this as something that would be permissible in the future?
In terms of its predicted environmental footprint, yes. What people aren't saying about SMRs, number one, the definition of SMR is 300 megawatts or smaller. So you have to figure what size fits the Yukon. And for example, 300 might be the right size for casino or for a nation building exercise that's hooked up to the grid to feed multiple mines. But what we're not hearing, but if you read through the fine print, huge work happening today in Canada and all around the world on developing this technology where SMRs, the concept is you can build it at a factory. So you don't build it on site. So you can build it faster, better quality control, and cheaper. Well, what they're finding, it's not cheaper. Bruce Nuclear in Ontario and the Ontario government is committed to a new 300 megawatt size unit for Bruce. Well, it's not even permitted yet. And they're already saying it's going to cost more than, the older 700,000 megawatt CANDU reactors. So.
John.
Yeah, so for the Yukon, we are engaged around small modular to see it as potential. But we should not be the first to go in Canada. It would be a mistake for us because take our total grid right now is 145 or something megawatts. So even if you did 250s, like there's so much commitment that you have to make and so far out that we need to see small modular in a few other places around Canada first. So we are partnering with Ontario, New Brunswick, Saskatchewan, Alberta, who are doing some of these tests. Second of all, with any energy solution here, we need partnership with First Nation. I have not had those conversations yet, so that's premature. Third of all, when we look at the horizon from when you, not the day when you break ground, but close enough to when you say, we're going for this, it's roughly a 15-year horizon before you get there is what we anticipate right now. Check out Travis's talk tomorrow at 4, I think. And so that's why we think Grid Connect is faster, and so we think of it as a better solution on those sort of big scale solutions for us. But it's not that you couldn't do both. For example, the Grid Connect to BC right now, BC doesn't have a ton of excess energy. Site C is all but planned out and used up. What that means is, and we know that everywhere is making this same load shift across to zero emission vehicles, et cetera. It's bigger here, but it's still big across the country, which means that you need to double your renewables across Canada or the world or beyond. And so as a result, you need more energy. So you could still have a grid connect and you could still get to small modular here someday, and then you would have an energy source to sell back at some point whenever it works best. Sorry. Stop, wherever you are. Sorry. Anyway, yes, SMRs. Good. You know what? Here's what I will say about all of these things. Sorry, Chelsea.
Still going.
We're in session, and this is our third last day of session, so things are a little hectic. But this is such an important conversation, honestly, for everyone here. We need to be following up every solution. So I get frustrated when I hear us closing doors because of positional things. No, I think we need to be following all these solutions. And to Laura Lee's point, I just want to acknowledge it and agree with it. I completely agree that we all need to be working together. These are big, big questions. So together for me means with industry, with First Nation governments, with the federal government. And by the way, also, and I say this to our environmental organizations, we need critical minerals. You can't ignore that. And I know it's not their bread and butter. Like they've made a sort of they've had a lot of time where they've criticized mining. And I say to them, fair enough. Criticize specific mistakes where we need to pull up our socks, that is fine. But you can't criticize mining in the sense that to do so, it, for me, says that you're not serious about climate change. Like we need this transition.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. My understanding in the federal budget, there was $38 billion earmarked for electrification in Canada, with Casino as an example being the biggest critical minerals project in Canada that I know of that could move the needle on GDP and taxes and things like that. Why isn't there an ability to really fast track this and embrace that money as with this tailwind in critical minerals?
So, okay, Rick, okay that I jump in?
Fire away.
Yeah, first of all, Canada has been an incredible partner to the Yukon. Like I just want to say that there's a question at the back with Jordan. That they have done a lot for the Yukon. So and they just came out with their Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund, and on the I always get this acronym wrong, but under our bilateral table talking about critical minerals, RERT, we have identified Grid Connect as our #1 priority, and so we are going to apply under the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund to get the starting planning dollars, and I'll give a shout out as well to the Council of Yukon First Nations. Last month held a workshop talking about energy infrastructure and where First Nations want to go with it. They've got another set of meetings coming up with leadership around this, and I think that they're keen to have an equity stake in these big projects. And so the feds, we are accessing federal dollars to support us in the planning of Grid Connect.
Question in the back.
Yeah, thanks. I also sit on the board of N&D Development Corporation, so John, we'll hold you to that and we'll reach out to you about partnering. And then the other thing is, I think kind of a bigger question here around not just energy, but the type of partnerships that's needed to be able to pursue these big mining projects. There's a lack of education of the supply chain to get to renewable energy, and I think that's a piece that maybe the government can think about. But what do you think, and this is a question for all panelists, that the government, Yukon government, can do right now to be able to enable the type of partnerships that are needed for equity stake in not just mining, but renewable energy projects?
Maybe start with
Well, I think it's a really good question. I mean, we have some of the tools existing today with Yukon University and some of the programming that they offer. There are a number of initiatives in other parts of Canada specifically geared towards development of renewable trades people, okay? And we're a little slow on the take with that one. Is JP Pinard in the room? He's been involved with some work of that type in the Northwest Territories, and it's really key. I mean, if you want to put Yukoners to work on renewable energy projects, you know, there's a transition. Just like in Alberta, the big fear with the feds trying to force the oil and gas workers to change hats, right? In some cases, quite a late stage in their career. So I think there are opportunities to do that. Technologies takes people. We're probably not going to get involved very much on the manufacturing side, but certainly in terms of the design, the construction, the operation, the maintenance, that can be done in Yukon.
I'll go next. Oh, no.
I can speak to what mining can do and what government can do to help mining. Jordan, I think mining companies need to continue to work. And as these things are moving more quickly than they were historically, hopefully, my hope is that the groundwork that's been laid in building relationships sets a stage for us to be nimble and adjust accordingly. I mean, I'll use NND because we're already talking with them about how the shift is coming in what they need to be involved. Believe it or not, employment has always been a leading factor, and given that there's such a low unemployment rate, they're looking at now what other things add value and how we do that. I think what our job is to stay communicative, work collaboratively, so that we're not stopping things every time that we have to overcome something new to ourselves, but rather we can continue down that process while nations are still working with government on the regulatory side of things. What can government do? Help acknowledge that, see that piece, and be part of it in looking for opportunities to minimize the required times while still meeting the intent. It's going to be a balance, but I think, you know, every process has you have the ability to look at it and clean it up and make it more refined. And I have some examples that could take us down rabbit holes like you can't believe, but there's opportunities out there even for some small wins that can reduce timelines, and every month is meaningful in a project.
I agree with what Hector was saying at first with the education piece, and also the panel that was speaking right before us here was talking about experiential learning. And just as an example, I went through Bob Sharp's experiential learning program in grade 9 or something, grade 9 and grade 11 actually. And I'm in the mining industry now because I am that kind of learner. I'm not Indigenous, but I think that type of learning is probably good for everyone, really. And I think the more that we attract people, especially local people, to the industry, to the cause of the energy transition and solving climate change, the more we can attract those kinds of people to this industry, the better we'll be. And so I think there's a role for the mining industry and also for the government to help step in and educate. And that's another thing. I'm a beneficiary of the Yukon grant, and that's a wonderful program. Also, I received the Aber Scholarship for University of Toronto for mining engineering, and I'm pretty sure that is still being offered, and I believe I'm still the only person who's gone through that. Oh, really? As far as I know. So yeah, I mean, more education, more knowledge needs to reach students, is what I'd say.
We're going to have to wrap up, but before we do, I'll just ask John to comment on that.
Just one example, fireweed and fireweed metals. Like when I talk to Brandon and his team, I think what they envision is that if, well, a mine there would work best if the mine was managed by the First Nation, by RRDC. Like, so we could start to imagine these things from the ground up and vertically integrated is what I think, Jordan. And so I know that we've got some legacy projects like Faro and Wolverine where we've had examples that we now have to clean up. But some of those projects that are on the horizon, I think of them, and they may not be fast mines. They might be. We'll try to get them started as quickly as possible, but you shouldn't necessarily rush through the mining. You could do it over time in a way, in a pace that is good for the community. So I think that there are some examples out there. And to your main question, how can we as a government assist communities and First Nation governments with that? I think really the best way is to make sure that we are in conversation at the table, supporting those conversations at the table, as Laura Lee says, to have the ongoing dialogue with the community so that we're addressing their concerns at the ground level and have built that trust over time. So I just think that we should be supportive of that in all ways that we can.
Okay, so we're going to have to stop. I'm just going to summarize very quickly by saying, there's opportunity out there. Clearly, there's a lot to do, and it's not straightforward, and it doesn't happen instantly. But not starting isn't a solution. We set targets for things like 2030, which is, I believe, 300 odd weeks away, which makes it sound really seriously near. So a lot to do. Thank you very much, John, Chelsea, Hector, and Laurelie, and enjoy the rest of your day.